let's run through some ideas here. So I have difficulties doing the sumo deadlift. I can't open my hips up, and just generally that position feels very uncomfortable for me. I seriously don't know where the power comes from when I'm in that position. I feel like just to get into the position, I am at the end range, and it's very uncomfortable for me to generate the right muscle kind of exertion power from that position. So that's one thing. I struggle with sumos. I also struggle with wide stance squats. Similar to the sumo, I don't know where the power comes from. When I go into those positions at the bottom, I feel very unsure of myself. My knees kind of want to buckle. I'm pushing my knees out, but I just feels extremely weak. That's the second thing. The third thing is the hip thrusting motion, right? So that glute thrust machine that's in the gym, you guys seen me do it a few times now. I've also done it at the end of this video as well, at the end of this training session. Once again, I feel very weak in that. Talking to a very strong athlete, somebody that can deadlift 330 kilos, he says to me, and I've heard this in many places as well, that you should be able to do a 10 rep. You should be able to do 10 reps with the glute thrust, with the hip thrust exercise, with the weight that you do 1 rep with a normal deadlift. So you should be able to rep out 10 reps with your 1 rep max in the glute thrust machine. So, I mean, there's no way in hell I will be able to do 260 kilos in a hip thrust exercise, barbell hip thrust. There's no way, I know it. So there's definitely common denominators amongst these 3 things. In a glute thrust, I feel cramping, I feel inactivity, I just feel like I can't fire the right muscles to move the weight, okay? And that's in a glute thrust machine, the hip thrust machine with the belt on. So I can't say there's pain associated with the barbell, it's uncomfortable technique. No, this is just pure muscle activation without any sort of, I guess, inhibition because of pain. I don't have the strength. And when I think about the wide stance squats, the sumo and the glute thrust machine, it's all pointing towards the glutes. But when I think about my glutes, I'm like, how can I have weak glutes when I have a deadlift of 260 kilos? My squat is 210, 265 is the deadlift. So I have pretty good hip extension. One of the primary effects of movements of the glutes is to hip extend. Okay, and there's also external rotation there as well. It's very confusing for me, man. Like, it's really confusing to wrap my head around some of these things, because we put the entire glute max into a box that says this. But each of these fibers, of the glute max has slightly different things. Like, as you kind of go towards the back, it might be more external hip rotation, right? So the lateral kind of glute max is more external rotation. The ones at the back are more hip extension. And so it gets very, very difficult when you try to kind of fine comb that stuff down to a fine, like small, precise fact that says you have weak glutes. Instead, I think it's much more beneficial for us to think about movement patterns. Okay, so I have difficulties putting my legs in a wide stance and exerting force. I feel uncomfortable like that. And that only makes sense because I've spent so much freaking time squatting narrow, right? So it makes sense. Now, the following idea here is that, is there any value for me to practice the wide stance squats, sumo deadlifts, glute thrusts, all of that stuff, if I predominantly do narrow stance, both for the conventional deadlift and for the squatting? Is there value in doing that? If you listen to somebody like Louis Simmons, who is very revered in this whole industry, in this whole genre of fitness, he says, if you get strong in the wide stance squat, your narrow stance squat will increase. But it's not the other way around the case. It's not the case the other way around. So if you get really strong with the narrow stance squat, you're not going to be strong in the wide stance squat. This is why he argues his lifters to lift the way they do, really, really wide stance. Now, I'm somebody that can't stomach the sight of somebody doing a really wide stance squat to a barely parallel position. Because to me, what got me into this whole fitness industry and this whole fitness world of training and squatting and all of that, like I said in the past, was seeing that first time clock of 250 kilo front squat, pause at the bottom, like complete pause, ATG, and then explode from that position. That to me is the pinnacle. That to me is the holy grail of human movement in my eyes. You don't have to agree with this, but this is what got me excited about going to a gym and putting a barbell on my back. Seeing myself go through that really wide stance position, I can barely stomach seeing that because it's just so ugly to me, man. It's not something that I want to do. However, when I do those wide stance squats, my hips feel amazing. When I do the hip thrust machine, my hips feel amazing. When I do sumos, I feel horrible because I feel like my hips want to pop out of the socket because I don't have that range of motion. I don't know how to bend over or squat into a sumo deadlift, if you will. I just don't have that mobility, number one, and I don't have that strength, especially when the narrow stance deadlift is so very strong. My body's like, what are you doing, man? Go back to what we know how to do. So there's like a conflicting message there from my brain. It's kind of like locking me up and I can't do the sumo. So I'm doing all of these things and I'm forming patterns in my mind. And these patterns is kind of what guides me. You know, this is how you find weaknesses. Instead of having that mentality of trying to focus into that nitty gritty, trying to work out what head of which muscle needs to get activated for you to kind of progress, I think it's much more palatable, much more easier for us to just think of movement patterns. Are you good at wide stance? Are you good at sumo? Are you good at conventional? Are you good at box squats? These things, okay? So that way we don't have to get, we don't have to lose our minds trying to identify which structure is doing what. Now, for a long period of time, I thought that sumo deadlifts was not like real world. Conventional deadlifts is like real world. And I had that kind of mentality for quite a while. And then I started talking to people, especially when I started this YouTube channel, I exposed to a lot of people that have different ideas. And one guy basically said to me, how do you pick up a catch? Do you use conventional or do you use sumo? And I thought to myself, well, shit, man, I would use sumo. Because I would stick my hands in between my legs, hook underneath, and lift like that. Now, it's not going to be a sumo stance like I'm doing a freaking middle split. Certainly not going to do that. But it's going to be like a frog stance kind of a sumo. So this is kind of the first thought in my mind that kind of opened this idea of, okay, so we need to be strong in that position. Now, I thought that if you're really strong in the conventional, you're going to be like using a cheat code when you do sumos, but it's not necessarily the case. And this is what Louis Simmons says. Louis Simmons is somebody that I don't like what he does in terms of how they lift and whatever. I think they're extraordinary athletes, but I don't like the aesthetic appeal of that sort of powerlifting geared and narrow, really poor range of motion. I really don't like that. If I got exposed to that rather than Klokov, I would say that I probably would have never gotten into weightlifting with the same kind of passion and fervor that I got when I saw Klokov move, when I saw Lou move, when I saw Tian Tao, Clarence Kennedy, where I saw all of these guys move. That to me was exciting because of the whole range of motion. It's kind of like applicable to sports. You can use Olympic weightlifting to learn how to jump. And then over time, I started listening to more and more Louis Simmons. And for some reason, I keep bringing him up because he has a way, man. He has a way of explaining things and he has a really good track record of making athletes. Now, these suited up athletes who are like squatting 1,000 pounds from Westside Barbell, you can't say that they are weak, okay? Now, the suits make it very, very murky and you don't really know what they're capable of properly. However, if you can withstand 1,000 pounds on your back, you're probably going to be strong in half of that body weight and half of that stance. That's kind of how I'm feeling right now. I know a lot of you guys were saying to me, Ivan, man, if you put on a belt and you widen that stance, went to parallel, you would kill it. And I used to think to myself, okay, maybe I could squat 250 if I could squat ATG, narrow, raw, high bar. Maybe that's a possibility. Now in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that's a possibility because I don't have that technique, that movement pattern ingrained into my skull at all. It's a foreign country to me, man. It's a completely foreign movement pattern and the muscles associated with that different movement pattern are completely non-existent. So This is where we can't say, oh, if you've got a 265 kilo deadlift conventional, you got strong glutes. Well, glutes are not just one box of glutes. It's many different fibers contained in the glutes. We know there's minimus, medius, and maximus, but even with each of those three titles, there are different fibers. It's not just one freaking fiber for the glute max. And this is where it gets really confusing because they say, the lateral heads, the lateral fibers contribute more to external rotation. The ones at the back contribute more or entirely contribute to hip extension. So this is where our human brain likes to put things into boxes, likes to simplify things for us to understand it. However, when you make these assumptions, when you make these conclusions, you will often get set in the wrong direction because there's more to the story than just one box titled glutes. This is why what you're seeing here is me doing these ugly vomit-producing squats. I hate the sight of this, but I'm so freaking weak. You're seeing me 60 kilos, and yeah, the bar kind of moves, but in that bottom position, I'm like, man, this is funky as hell, man. Like, I don't even know what muscle I'm using, but it was fatiguing me like crazy. I'd get up and I could feel my quads, I could feel my glutes in a different way. So just before I was doing 180 for a set of 5. This, I'm doing 60 kilos, man, and it's feeling funky. After this, I moved over to the glute thrust machine, and I put 3 plates on the side. So what's that? 120 kilos. I don't know what the machine itself weighs. Probably, well, let's not even count that. Let's just say 120. And I was doing sets of 10, and I was trying to pause at the top. And you'll see when I get to it, you'll see that I actually have trouble fully locking out my glutes in a complete hip extension because I have anterior pelvic tilt and I have kind of like that restriction. But you can bet your bottom dollar I was trying to squeeze my glutes, and 2 things were happening. My hamstrings were cramping up at the top, so I couldn't hold it for much longer. And my glutes were shaking, also threatening to cramp. So I think, putting all of these things into the same basket, I think I can say that I'm not weak in the glutes. I'm weak in that movement pattern. That's kind of how I'm thinking about all of this. This is why a lot of you guys have been asking, why am I doing wide stance squats? It's because of this. It's because of this, and it's because that idea that Louis and many other people have said that if you can do X, you'll be able to do X. So if I can do 265 kilo deadlift conventional, I should be able to do a set of 10 with that weight in a glute or hip thrust machine, or a barbell hip thrust, or whatever you're using. There's no way in hell I can even get that thing off the ground at 260. I know that for a fact. It's way too freaking heavy. So I need to get strong in that movement pattern. It's confusing because I have pretty good hip extension, right? I can deadlift to 65. So this is where some of these strength standards start to play on our minds, because we're like, okay, you want to move forward, and we know that you are as strong as the weakest link of your body. And so exposing some of these weaknesses, okay, I'm going to target that, and that's going to kind of send me over through the plateau. That's how I'm feeling right now. I'm doing these wide stance squats now every single session. So I do my whatever squat I'm doing, either front squat or back squat, or whatever I choose to do. And then after that, I'll put 1 plate on and do these wide stance squats. And they're tough. They're really, really tough. They're taxing. But I'm hoping there's going to be carryover. I'm hoping that that's what's going to happen. I'm just thinking now, all those times that I've kind of introduced unilateral leg movements, and I got like a really good glute pump because it was a different sensation. It's an interesting thought to try to kind of think of exercises which you're weak at and try to progress those lifts and hope that your main movement improves as well. So the aim is to work up to 260 kilo or thereabouts hip thrusts. And I won't be able to do that much weight on this machine. I'm using this machine purely just to, introduce myself to that movement pattern, and it's comfortable. But eventually I'll have to go to a barbell and I'll have to start loading this stuff up. I'm doing sets of 10 here, and like this was killing me. So I need to do that, get much more stronger at the hip extension or the glute thrusting movement. I need to get better at wide stance squats. As we are right now, so I haven't really done a lot of these wide stance squats, but it feels good. Okay, I don't know whether that's because it's just different, but my hips feel good when I do them. So when I walk away, I'm like, oh man. One of the feelings that I get is that I feel like it's addressing the anterior pelvic tilt in some weird way. One, I think the glutes are kind of being targeted in a different way. And two, my hip flexors are I feel my hip flexors at the bottom. On top of all of this feeds back into this idea that I want to do the middle splits. And I feel like these wide stance squats are going to help with that. And I have a feeling the glute thrusting is also going to help with that because it's going to remove that anterior pelvic tilt. So lots of different ideas. This is where my mind is right now. This is what I'm doing. I don't know. I don't know whether it is acceptable to do that, to have such glaring weaknesses and expect to progress. I know there's a lot of guys out there which we all watch, kind of like the record holders of powerlifting, and a lot of those guys are kind of all arounders, if you know what I mean. Like they can have really good conventional, really good sumo. I don't have a good sumo. I don't have a good hip extension. So let's see what this takes me. And this is the thing. We all know the noob gains are really quick. So, going from one plate on the damn wide stance squats to two plates is going to be fairly quickly. It's going to be fairly quick because you're making so much ground with so little effort. So I know that's going to be really good. And I reckon, I'm suspecting that my glute thrusting is also going to improve really quickly. So it's not going to cost me too much because the weights that I'm using are so little. So it only makes sense to kind of spend a little bit of time and see what the effect is on the main movements. That's the idea behind all of this right now. It'll be interesting to see what you guys squat. This is what in the comments, if you guys do all of these lifts, I would like to know, just prove me wrong or right or whatever you think it is. I would love to have you guys basically say what you squat, whether it's narrow or wide, what you glute thrust, what you squat wide, and then if you can do sumo and conventional. Because I think it's almost like a little survey of what's happening with you. And I want to see whether there's any carryover to that, whether we can draw any conclusions in all of this. Maybe I'm off. Maybe it's just a novelty of the particular things that I'm doing that are causing me grief. I don't know. I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say on this. Thank you to everyone on the list. Thank you to everyone on the comments. Once again, really good discussions in yesterday's video about that unfortunate incident in the gym with that fella being freaking hit while he was doing squats. Really interesting ideas about all of that. So lots of comments. I'm making my way through it, but really, really enjoyed that aspect. Thanks to everyone, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.